Good evening, class. Today we're here with Marymount, California University's president, Mr. Brian Marcotte. So, President, thank you for being here with us.
Good to be with you.
Thank you. You're the leader of this university. So, could you guide us through your past experiences, your past leadership experiences, leadership roles that have taken you to where you are today?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I am broadly defined as a non-traditional university president. And what that actually means is that I did not come from an academic background.
Okay.
My background, very technically, is as an engineer. I'm a petroleum engineer by degree, and I worked for 35 years in the oil and gas business with a major oil company, and then nearly 10 additional years with a small entrepreneurial company of which I was the president and CEO. After that, I did a little bit of consulting work, and then retired, and then became the president of Marymount after 10 years of work with the Board of Trustees.
Wow, that's impressive. And then, so your leadership career or your first leadership roles were within the oil industry?
That's correct.
And your first position as a president was with the smaller company or with the big oil company?
Well, it depends how you define that.
Right.
Let me tell you what the situation was. I became what was called in the company that I worked for, which was a major oil company, in the Netherlands. I was we called in our internal nomenclature general manager of a subsidiary company, Unical Netherlands. And within the Netherlands, I was actually referred to as the president of Unical Netherlands. So that was my first step from an operational position to a true executive position.
Wow, that's impressive. And have you lived in any other countries other than the U.S. and Netherlands?
I have. In fact, I was overseas for more than 21 years, all things considered. I was actually in Indonesia twice. The first time was on the island of Borneo in a very remote area, the city of Balikpapan. And then later I went back to Indonesia a second time in the capital of Jakarta. In between times, I was in Thailand, in Bangkok, where I was the president of the Unical subsidiary there. And Thailand's operations for Unical International Oil Company were the largest that we had anywhere in the world, and so it was a very interesting position.
That's excellent. And how, obviously, this experiences overseas have shaped you as an individual and as a leader, but what are the key points that you would take away and say, okay, this is what I really learned, or this has really made me a better leader based off the experiences you've had overseas?
That's a great question, Joaquin. The first thing I would say that my experiences have done is give me a great appreciation for other cultures. Just working overseas is an experience that I could not replicate anywhere else other than actually being overseas. But the other thing that was so important to me is, and this is going to sound a little bit, I don't know how it'll sound, quite truthfully to you. It may sound funny to you, but I became very, very patriotic while I was overseas. And the reason for that is having had the opportunity of living in countries where the people in the country did not have the same freedoms that we have here, gave me a different perspective, and it gave me a great appreciation for what we do have. So that was important. The multicultural aspects of leadership in a foreign country is also quite unique, because culture is important. How I would relate to our national employees was a very critical thing. It was different than just working in the United States, where we all spoke the same language, we all had the same cultural background, and we all kind of did the same things in our spare time and all of that. But to work in a foreign country, for me, and you will have some appreciation for that, to work in a foreign country was very unique, and I always had to pass the communications through the screen of how might this be either understood or not understood from a cultural perspective, and make sure that I was always very clear in my communication.
That's excellent. That's a fantastic experience, and I'm guessing that it's also different the way you motivate people, the way you get to people, and the way on how you communicate things to make those people kind of follow your lead, your path, right? I'm sure, yeah, it was an unbelievable experience. So thank you for sharing.
Sure.
And let me ask you, going back to when you were a kid, how would you describe yourself as a kid?
I was just a kid. I did things that I probably shouldn't have done. I did things that were probably dangerous, at least in my parents' eyes. Yeah, just a kid. It was a different time. You can see by my white hair that it was a long time ago when I was a kid. But we had real freedom to go around, do things. We were much more, in some ways, much more independent at that time, because we would get on our bicycles and we would ride for 10 or 20 miles to go someplace without any parental supervision. We just went out and did what we wanted to do, and our parents didn't worry about us. It was a little bit different environment. And so, yeah, and I played sport. I was always involved in baseball. Baseball was my passion, just as soccer is yours. And starting from when I was probably 6 or 7 years old, playing competitively, and that carried through my university day.
Excellent. And so, did you have any, let's say, personality traits that you kind of identified as a kid that told you, I'm a leader, or I was born to be a leader, or it's someone told you, by the way you were as a kid, I think you're going to be a leader one day?
I suppose so. During early days of schooling and that sort of thing, if there were what we would call student government offices and things like that, I tended to gravitate to those sorts of positions. And so I was involved in student government, I was involved in scouts, and had leadership positions with my peers. And oftentimes took leadership positions in athletic teams and things such as that. So I would say the answer to that, I guess, is I tended in that direction. Not that I was necessarily the best leader for every instance, but I would not be afraid of taking leadership positions.
It came natural to you. It wasn't a forced thing, like you force yourself to be on those positions.
Exactly.
So that's phenomenal. And one of my last questions would probably be, how different are the roles that you had on the oiling industry and in comparison to your role today as the president of Marymount California University?
That's a very good question. It's a very difficult question to answer, because I will say very overtly, when I first came into the job as president of Marymount, I was kind of under the impression that leadership or management is management, and that it is readily transferable from one organization to another. What I've found over the last 2 years is that there are differences between industry and higher education. And those differences are neither good nor bad, they're just different. And sometimes in the relationship of my position with, say, faculty or staff are a little bit different than they are in private industry, where the circumstances are a little bit different. In Thailand, when I was president of Unical Thailand, we had about 4,000 employees, so it was a very, very different sort of circumstance. So we had to maintain certain levels of organization in order to communicate to that many people. Here we're small. Here we can break some of those barriers and have direct contact. I love talking with people, and I love being around this particular community of Marymount. But it's easy to communicate, but you still have to be aware of making a communication effort. And I'm clearly of the opinion that communication probably is at the root of successes and failures within organizations. If we can communicate well, we're much more likely to be successful. If we communicate poorly, we're much more likely to be unsuccessful.
And how do you manage that level of communication? How do you determine what's the right amount of communication or not the right amount of communication, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I don't know that there's a rule for that. I would just say, you would get, or I get, when I'm in a situation, a sense of whether the communication is occurring, either by talking to somebody directly and looking them in the eye and reading body language and all of that will help you understand whether you're communicating effectively. And I think it's very important. That's why, honestly, I'm not a very good representative of today's generation, because I don't do well with texting and I don't do well with emails sometimes. I like to be with people and talking with people. And from my perspective, that's more just the style of who I am. That's not to say, again, right or wrong, but that's how I am able to hopefully tell if I'm communicating well with somebody.
Yeah, absolutely. You can, or I can tell as a student worker that's at the school most of the day, every day, and I can be, I can tell that every time I go out, I see you every day outside talking to people, talking to staff, students, and faculty, so you are a very active person in terms of that personal communications. That I think at the end of the day, we are humans, and we do need the personal touch, the face-to-face communication. So yeah, I think that's a great answer.
You used a term just there that I'm going to expand upon just a little bit, and it's called the personal touch. Many years ago, going back into the mid-'80s, actually, I was involved in a study group that was reading a little book, and the book was called The Blessing. And The Blessing talked about 5 very important personal attributes. And it was written originally to be between a parent and child, or a discussion about the relationship between a parent and child. But I found over the years that it was a great guide in how to just work with people in general, whether employees or not employees, but just working with people. And I'll go real quickly through the 5 elements of The Blessing, just so that you kind of get a feel for it, because it's been a very important part of my relationship wherever I've worked. The first one is called, in fact, the personal touch, which is what prompted me to talk about it. The personal touch is just that human beings need to be in touch with one another, physically in touch with one another. Now, in today's era, we have to be careful with that as to what that actually means. But the meaningful touch, the personal touch, is something that people, I believe, desire. Maybe shaking hands, it may be a touch on the shoulder, it may be something like that. That physical contact can be very, very important. The second element of the blessing is the spoken word. I worry about that sometimes today when we're getting away from the spoken word somewhat. But the spoken word has great value, so that you hear from me and I hear from you exactly what you want and what you want to have, what you have on your mind that you're trying to convey. The third thing is words of high value. I have found that it does little good to use words that belittle the person that you're talking to. To drag them down with your words is generally not a good tactic in my mind. And in the elements of the blessing, using words of high value have always been important to me, both in the work world, but also in personal life. With my children, I tried never to use negative words with them. That's not to say we praised everything they did if they did something wrong, but we didn't ever say things like, well, that's stupid, or that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. We never used that kind of terminology. So words of high value, I think, are something to always keep in mind. The fourth thing is to picture a bright future. Always have in mind how things could be if we wanted them to be better. And always referring to that bright future, I think, is very important, whether it be in your family or whether it be in your work situation or whether it be at school. Keeping that vision of where we want to be, I think, is really critical. And then the final thing is a commitment to that vision or that future that we're talking about. If we can commit to that and get everyone looking with commitment to where we want to be, then we're 90% of the way there to solving our problems. And so I've used those 5 elements of the blessing for years in my work life and in my personal life. And I just offer those to you as something to think about.
That's powerful. That's brilliant, and evidently it has worked well for you because you're a very successful individual. So I think it's very powerful, and I think myself and all the students watching this are gonna find a huge amount of value on what you just shared with us. So
My pleasure.
I thank you for that. And if we don't, it's 1:30 and you have responsibilities and meetings, but I thank you for your time. I know you're a very busy person and you make time for us to share your words of wisdom, your experiences. And like I said, I think a lot of us are going to find a lot of value in what you just said to us. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Thanks,
Professor.
Joaquin.
Thank you.